Okay, what's good, everyone? It's Nigel here, Trinidad Empowerment Network. So, the reopening of Petrotrin has been discussed in Trinidad again as of a few days ago. So, I'm a bit late to the party on this one, but nonetheless, I'm here and let's talk about it. So, a new dawn, the history repeating itself, the reopening of Petrotrin. Optimistic news. People are excited. I've looked at social media, and for the most part, a lot of people are reacting to this. Nostalgia. You remember your parents talking about Petrotrin and how great it was for Trinidad and Tobago. 7 years after its closure. 7 years after its closure. So the Petrotrin Refinery is once again at the forefront of the national discussion, everyone's imagination. Like I say, everyone remember their parents, if you're young enough or old enough, your parents talking about Petrotrin and how great it was for the national economy, and it was. So with renewed efforts to restart the operations, many see this as a beacon of hope for the economy of Trinidad, for the economic revival of Trinidad and Tobago. But to move forward effectively, we must first understand what took place in the past. We must understand the past. History is important. To understand where you come from, it's important. That's the only way you can move forward. You can understand your future. So let's delve into the past and what happened in the past and why Petrotrin was shut down in the first place, right? So in 2018, the Petrotrin Refinery was obviously shut down, as most of you know. It was shut down under the PNM administration, as most of you are aware. The decision was attributed to several critical issues that was happening at the time. Mainly, and to put it simply, the company was bleeding money. It was losing a lot of money. Financial losses between 2012 and 2017 that Petrotrin incurred was exceptional. I'm talking about losses exceeding 8 billion TT dollars. By 2018, the company was burdened with around 12 billion TT dollars in debt and required an estimated 25 billion TT dollars for infrastructure. Just to upgrade the infrastructure, 25 billion TT dollars was required. Not to mention debt that the company owed, repayment debt that the company owed. So the operational efficiencies of Petrotrin was not great. As you can tell, the refinery struggled with decline in productivity and was deemed uncompetitive alongside other international competitors. So its operation was heavily reliant, or became heavily reliant, on imported crude oil due to insufficient local supply as well. So the country wasn't producing enough, so it was importing crude oil, which didn't help with the efficiency. See how that makes sense? If that makes sense to you, if you understand how this game works. So the environmental concern as well. Remember in 2013, there was a massive oil spill, resulted in the leakage of approximately 7,000 barrels of oil. And this it just highlights the lapse in the maintenance of Petrotrin. This happened in 2013 for those of you who are old enough to remember the massive oil spill, right? So there was a lot going on, a lot of mismanagement going on. So both major political parties have faced increased criticism regarding the handling of Petrotrin. So the UNC administration was obviously in charge between 2010 and 2015, and during this period, the refinery underwent huge upgrades, huge financial upgrades. And the estimated cost initially was projected to be around 350 million US dollars. That quickly escalated to 1.3 billion US dollars. due to the rise in costs in construction and delays and these things inevitably happened when the company is under construction. The bill always goes up. So it went from 350 million US to 1.3 billion. The PNM government decided to shut down the refinery, as we know, when they came back into power in 2018. And they cited that the company was just financially unsustainable. They were bleeding money. However, the process they did it under, it faced massive criticism, if you remember. The execution of how they did it, including the handling of employees and severances and the subsequent restructuring into multiple entities, did not go down very well in Trinidad and Tobago. It did not go. So the handling was poor. The handling was poor. With huge protests, etc., etc. I don't know how many of you remember the fake oil scandal in 2017, where Petrotrin was embroiled in significant fraud cases involving A&V Oil and Gas Limited, where there was allegations of where an internal audit was done that revealed discrepancies between reported oil production and actual delivery. And this suggested that Petrotrin paid approximately 100 million for oil that was never supplied. So you can see the sort of corruption and nonsense that was going on that aided to the failing of Petrotrin, the failing of this once great company in Trinidad and Tobago. A publicly owned company, by the way, owned by the people, or owned by Trinidad and Tobago. Forensic audits by a company called Kroll Consulting and Gaffney Klein confirmed the discrepancies, by the way, I just spoke of. The reservoir in question was found incapable of producing the volumes reported. So legal actions as well took place or happened. The matter was referred to the police for further investigation. However, concerns were raised about potential interference and the destruction of critical evidence. What I'm saying to you, the whole thing turned out to be a mess. The whole thing turned out to be a mess. Corruption allegations, fraud, etc., etc. So that aside, let's talk about the path forward and the opportunities and challenges that Petrotrin faces, the revival of Petrotrin faces. So the potential reopening of Petrotrin, the refinery, represent both a opportunity, of course, optimism, but it also represents challenges, as I've shown you. The things that took place in the past. Can we survive? Can we push past, or could we be better if it does happen? The economic revival, restarting operations, could potentially create jobs, as we know, stimulate local industries and reduce dependency on imported fuel. That's a huge thing. That's a huge thing for Trinidad and Tobago if that does happen. But the financial considerations of refurbishment, the cost to refurbish Petrotrin, the cost alone to refurbish Petrotrin, doing my research, is estimated to be between, wait for it, $600 million US and $1 billion US. Between 600 million and $1 billion US. So securing international financing and ensuring transparent operation is key here. Who are the investors? Who's going to come in and invest? Where is the money going to come from? It's a question you have to ask yourself. Where is that money coming from? So the current administration has expressed interest of obviously in investors from abroad, because we need investors to reopen this refinery. However, some of their past statements about honoring the previous administration deals and the layer of complexity involved suggests that, I don't know if you remember a company called Awanda, a Nigerian company. They were the number one company interested in reinvesting in Petrotrin or reopening Petrotrin. And I don't think the UNC is interested in using them as an investor. So the history, as we stand, potentially on the cusp of a potential revival, for me, it's kind of imperative to learn from our past mistakes. And I think we almost have to prioritize transparency. Where is the investment coming from? Who are the investors? Who are the foreign investors? And how much do they expect in return? I think we have to ensure that the refinery's future serves the nation's best interests, if it does happen. So you have a right to be optimistic about this, but you have to ask yourself the real questions as to who the actual investors are, what do they want in return, the amount of money it's going to cost to potentially reopen Petrotrin, and if that money is going to be used to diversify the economy and bring other means of income to the Trinidad and Tobago's economy. I've often talked about a wealth fund, that the money that we make from the natural resources in Trinidad needs to be put into. That way, the money that we make can be used to potentially diversify the economy. And I often talk about agriculture, manufacturing, energy, renewable energy as always at the forefront of my imagination when it comes to the Trinidad and Tobago economy. The world is moving towards renewable energy, and we should be moving along with it. In fact, we should be ahead of the game because of the weather condition we have in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago. Renewable energy can be easily implemented, I believe, in Trinidad and Tobago. We have all of the weather condition for it. Wind, the sun is what you need for renewable energy. Let alone, for those of you who watch me all the time, or watch my videos all the time, hear me talk about diversification of the economy all the time. We talk about this all the time, right? We need to diversify. We need to look at other means of income. And I've said this many, many times. You probably get bored of me talking about it, whether that be manufacturing and energy, etc., etc. If we can't produce our own food and we rely on imports from America, which we do, I say to you all the time, we import 80% of our food from America. We need to stop that. We need to invest in agriculture straight away. That should be the first thing we do. We cannot survive. A country cannot survive without food. So the fact that we rely on America for the food that we consume is a travesty to me, in my opinion. The second thing is energy. We need to produce our own energy. We cannot rely on importing anything from anywhere else. We have to be able to produce our own energy. And like I said, the world is moving towards renewable energy fast. You look at countries like Dubai and Saudi Arabia. These countries are massive oil-developed countries, but even they themselves are moving away from oil and gas into renewable energy. China is at the forefront of this, at the number one economy or in the world. Well, I think they are the number one economy in the world. Most people say America. China, for me, is the number one economy in the world, but renewable energy is at the number one. They are the biggest investors in renewable energy, and we need to do the same. So agriculture, manufacturing, energy is something that we, Trinidad and Tobago, must get into. We're only a small island at the end of the day. We cannot compete with this huge economy. That's why we have the likes of CARICOM. That's why I talk about the BRICS pact and potentially CARICOM becoming a member of BRICS, which only works to strengthen the Caribbean. The BRICS pact is the biggest, most powerful pact in the world, bigger than the European Union, bigger than the G7, and we need to diversify and look at somehow CARICOM becoming a part of the BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa initially started the BRICS Pact, by the way. Those are the countries that I believe we should be getting involved in. I believe that's the future. I believe the American empire is in collapse. I believe the American empire is falling, and we need to look for pastures new. Anyway, I've gone on from Petrotrin to diversifying the economy to the American economy, etc., etc. Essentially, the revival of Petrotrin can be a good thing if used correctly, if we make the right investment. But the amount of money the company was bleeding in the past make me I'm a bit pessimistic as to whether this would happen. Who are the investors? That hasn't been discussed. If it is indeed foreign investors, then these foreign investors would want something back for their investment. Quite frankly, they're not doing this for free. So it raises a question whether this is it becomes a Trinidad-owned company like it was before, meaning a public-owned company, or does it become a foreign investors company? They will want something back for their investment. Let's face it, that's the reality. And that's another question we have to ask ourselves. So none of this is really clear, but it remains exciting news for Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't want to burst your bubble. Like I said, I want to come on here and be negative about it. I want to come on here and be optimistic about it. If it does happen and if it's used in the right way, it can only be a good thing. But I've given you the reality of reopening this company. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video. For now, much love. God bless. Take care. Peace.